Greetings, warriors and dreamers. Welcome to the realms of sleep, where tonight we journey through the epic world of God of War. I am your guide through the 9 realms, where ancient gods whisper their secrets and mythic landscapes unfold before us. From the frost-covered mountains of Midgard to the golden halls of Asgard, these tales of gods and giants will carry you into peaceful slumber. Lay down your weapons, rest your weary head, and allow the legends of these powerful beings to become the landscape of your dreams. The battles have been fought, and now is the time for rest. So close your eyes, brave one. Let the fire of the hearth warm you as we begin our journey through realms both wondrous and dangerous. The wind howled across the jagged peaks of Jotunheim, carrying bitter cold that seemed to cut through even the thickest firs. Kratos and Atreus trudged upward along a narrow path carved into the mountainside, their breaths forming small clouds that dissipated quickly in the thin air. They had been climbing since midday, following ancient markers that Atreus had discovered in one of his mother's journals, simple runes that would have been invisible to anyone who didn't know to look for them. The pale winter sun cast long shadows across the snow-covered slopes, offering little warmth against the biting cold that intensified as they ascended higher into the mountains. "How much farther?" Kratos asked, his deep voice barely audible above the wind's mournful song. Though he showed no outward signs of fatigue, the journey had been long, and the air grew thinner with each step upward. Atreus paused, brushing snow from his eyelashes before consulting the journal once more. Its pages fluttered in the wind as he traced his finger along their current path on the hand-drawn map. Small notes in his mother's careful handwriting bordered the route, offering cryptic observations about landmarks they might encounter. "Mother's notes say the observatory sits at the crown of this peak," he replied, looking up at the mountain's summit that disappeared into low-hanging clouds. "We should reach it before nightfall if we maintain our pace." "Observatory?" Mimir inquired from his position secured to Kratos' belt. The disembodied head had remained uncharacteristically quiet during much of their ascent, perhaps conserving energy in the bitter cold. "Ah, you must be referring to the Sky Grim, the Starkeeper's sanctum. I'd heard rumors of its existence, but never met anyone who'd actually found it. Mother wrote that the giants built it to study the stars," Atreus explained, adjusting his bow and quiver to distribute their weight more comfortably across his back. "She said they believed the cosmos held messages, patterns that could reveal glimpses of what was to come." Kratos grunted non-committally, but his eyes narrowed slightly. Experience had taught him that prophecies and portents rarely brought good tidings, especially for those who sought them out. Yet he continued upward, following his son's lead along the treacherous path, his greater weight occasionally causing sections of snow-covered stone to crumble beneath his feet. As they climbed higher, the clouds began to thin, revealing a vast expanse of Jotunheim spread out below them. Enormous snow-covered peaks punctuated the landscape like the vertebrae of some colossal beast, while distant valleys lay shrouded in mist and shadow. The realm of the giants, now empty of its builders, remained breathtaking in its desolate grandeur. The path grew steeper and narrower as they neared the summit, in some places barely wide enough for Kratos' broad shoulders. Here the ancient builders had carved handholds into the sheer rock face, allowing climbers to pull themselves upward where walking became impossible. Atreus navigated these sections with the agility of youth, while Kratos followed with deliberate, powerful movements, occasionally reaching up to ensure his son's secure footing on particularly precarious stretches. "Look!" Atreus called suddenly, pointing upward through a break in the clouds. "I can see something!" Kratos followed his son's gesture and caught glimpse of a structure near the mountain's peak, a circular formation of pale stone that seemed to grow directly from the mountain itself, its edges smooth and curved in contrast to the jagged rocks surrounding it. Even at this distance, they could discern careful craftsmanship in its construction, precision that distinguished deliberate architecture from natural formation. The observatory, Mimir confirmed, his wooden features animated with scholarly interest. Constructed during the early days of giant civilization, if I recall correctly, long before Odin's conflicts with their kind, the sight of their destination lent new energy to their climb. As the daylight began to wane, casting long shadows across the mountainside, they made their final approach to the summit. The path, which had been growing fainter as they ascended, suddenly widened into a proper stone stairway, its edges carved with intricate runes partially obscured by ice and time. Unlike the natural path below, these steps had been sized for giant users, each nearly as high as Atreus's knee, and requiring conscious effort to ascend. "Can you read them?" Kratos asked, noting his son's attention to the ancient markings that spiraled along the stairway's outer edge. Atreus knelt beside the stairway, brushing away accumulated snow with his gloved hand to reveal more of the inscription. The runes glowed faintly at his touch, responding to his Jotnar heritage with subtle recognition. "Parts of it," he replied, brow furrowed in concentration. "It's an old form of the giant language, older than what Mother taught me. Something about ascenders. No, those who seek the elevated perspective. And here, truth revealed in patterns beyond our realm. A fitting welcome for an observatory," Mimir commented. "The giants always did have a poetic way about them, even in their most practical endeavors." They continued up the stairway as the sun sank lower toward the horizon, painting the clouds in vivid hues of orange and purple. The temperature dropped noticeably with the fading light, the already bitter cold becoming even more intense. By the time they reached the summit, the first stars had begun to appear in the eastern sky, pinpricks of light emerging from the deepening blue canopy above. The observatory stood before them, more impressive up close than it had appeared from below. A circular structure perhaps 50 feet in diameter, its walls made of a pale stone that seemed to hold a subtle luminescence even in the fading light. No roof covered the chamber. Instead, the walls curved upward before opening completely to the sky, like a giant eye gazing eternally upward. Despite centuries of exposure to Jotunheim's harsh elements, the structure showed minimal weathering, testament to both exceptional materials and craftsmanship beyond ordinary stonework. A single archway provided entrance, its surfaces covered with astronomical symbols and constellations carved with remarkable precision. Atreus approached it with reverent curiosity, his fingers tracing some of the familiar patterns. "Mother showed me these," he said softly. "The bear, the serpent, the hunter. She taught me to find them in the night sky." His voice held equal measures of wonder at the ancient craftsmanship and sadness at the memories of those quieter times, evenings spent beside their cabin, his mother's gentle voice naming stars while his father remained inside, maintaining characteristic distance from such seemingly impractical activities. Kratos stood silently beside his son, studying the structure with the cautious assessment that had become second nature through centuries of encountering seemingly benign situations that concealed deadly threats. His fingers flexed unconsciously, maintaining readiness for whatever might emerge when they crossed the threshold. "We should shelter here for the night," Atreus suggested, glancing at the darkening sky where heavy clouds were gathering once more. "The wind is picking up, and there's no safe path down the mountain in darkness." He shivered slightly, though whether from cold or anticipation remained unclear. "Besides, Mother's journal said the observatory reveals its purpose fully only under night skies. Kratos nodded his agreement. Check the interior first, he instructed. Thoroughly. Atreus slipped through the archway into the observatory, while Kratos remained outside, alert for any reaction to his son's entry. When no alarming sounds or magical discharges followed, he ducked his head beneath the relatively low entrance and stepped inside as well, straightening to his full height once clear of the archway. The interior was a single, circular chamber, its floor made of the same pale stone as the outer walls, but inlaid with darker material forming complex patterns that Kratos recognized as star charts. Around the perimeter stood what appeared to be instruments of various designs, brass and crystal constructions mounted on stone pedestals, their surfaces etched with runes and fitted with lenses, mirrors, and articulated arms that could apparently be adjusted and aligned in different configurations. At the chamber's center stood a raised circular platform, perhaps 10 feet across, with a single throne-like seat facing north. The seat was sized for a giant, making it impractically large for either Kratos or Atreus, but the platform itself offered a clear view of the entire chamber and the sky above. It's incredible, Atreus breathed, turning slowly to take in the entire space. His voice echoed slightly despite the open ceiling, suggesting acoustic properties deliberately incorporated into the chamber's design. Look at these instruments. They must have used them to track the stars, maybe even the movements of other realms. Indeed, Mimir agreed when Kratos placed him on a suitable ledge where he could observe their surroundings. The giants were unparalleled astronomers. They understood connections between celestial movements and the flow of magic throughout the realms that even the Aesir never fully grasped. Odin sought their knowledge desperately, though he would never admit as much. The Allfather's particular interest, Mimir explained, had centered on stellar configurations that allegedly revealed potential pathways between realms, natural thinning of boundaries that occurred when certain cosmic alignments manifested. While Odin's primary travel method relied on his mastery of Yggdrasil's branches, he remained obsessively interested in alternative routes that might circumvent the world tree's inherent restrictions. As twilight deepened outside, something remarkable began to happen within the observatory. Faint lines of blue light appeared along the floor's inlaid patterns, tracing the star charts with subtle illumination that grew gradually stronger as darkness fell. The effect spread slowly from the center outward, like ripples in a pond, until the entire floor glowed with a soft light that provided just enough illumination to navigate the space without impeding vision of the night sky above. It responds to nightfall, Atreus observed, watching as the blue light continued to strengthen. The illumination cast his young face in ethereal relief, emphasizing the wonder in his expression. I wonder what else it does. They soon found out. As full darkness descended and stars began to appear in greater numbers overhead, the instruments around the room's perimeter emitted soft, resonant tones. Not quite musical, but harmonious nonetheless, like the gentle humming of crystal glasses filled with water. The sounds varied in pitch and duration, seemingly responding to particular stars becoming visible above. It's singing to the stars, Atreus said with quiet wonder. Or maybe the stars are singing to it. Both, in a manner of speaking, Mimir suggested. The giants understood what they called celestial resonance, the idea that cosmic bodies emit energy patterns that can be detected and interpreted with sufficient sensitivity. These instruments appear designed to both receive these emissions and respond to them, creating a form of dialogue between observer and observed. Kratos moved carefully around the chamber's edge, examining the instruments more closely now that they had activated. Despite his natural wariness of magic, especially magic he didn't understand, he found himself intrigued by the craftsmanship. These were not crude implements, but precisely engineered devices, created with remarkable skill. One particularly complex apparatus featured a series of concentric brass rings that could be rotated independently, each inscribed with different celestial symbols. "That's an orrery," Mimir explained, noting Kratos' interest. "A mechanical model of the cosmic arrangement. The giants understood that the 9 realms exist in specific relation to one another, their positions influencing how magic flows between them. With the proper adjustments, such a device could theoretically predict optimal times for travel between realms, or even moments when barriers might thin naturally." The practical implications of such knowledge were not lost on Kratos. Throughout their journeys, they had relied on fixed pathways between realms, routes established through magical or divine intervention that remained relatively stable regardless of timing. The possibility of naturally occurring transitions, predictable through astronomical observation, offered potential strategic advantages worth consideration. While Kratos examined the instruments, Atreus had climbed onto the central platform, where he now stood gazing upward at the increasingly star-filled sky. The clouds that had threatened earlier had mysteriously dissipated, leaving the heavens remarkably clear. From this elevated vantage point, far above the mists and smoke of lower elevations, the stars appeared unusually bright and numerous, filling the night sky with uncountable points of light that seemed close enough to touch. "Father, come look," Atreus called, his voice hushed with awe. "I've never seen so many stars." Setting aside his examination of the instruments, Kratos joined his son on the central platform. Together they gazed upward at the cosmic tapestry spread above them. Even to Kratos, who had witnessed many wonders throughout his long existence, the display was impressive. Not in the ostentatious manner of divine magic, but in the quiet grandeur of natural phenomena beyond mortal influence. As they watched, something new began to happen. The humming of the instruments grew slightly louder, and beams of light emerged from several of them, projecting upward and outward to touch the observatory's inner walls. Where these beams made contact, complex patterns appeared, constellations rendered in glowing lines, connected by mathematical symbols and runic annotations that seemed to hover just above the stone surface. These projections formed a comprehensive celestial map that wrapped entirely around the circular chamber, creating the impression of standing within a representation of the night sky itself. "It's creating a map of the sky," Atreus realized, turning slowly to take in the projections that now surrounded them. "But not just what we can see. Look, there are patterns I've never observed, stars that must be visible only from other realms." He pointed to a particular section where unfamiliar configurations dominated. "These don't match anything Mother taught me about our night sky." Indeed, among the familiar constellations were arrangements Kratos didn't recognize. Stars grouped in formations unknown in the night skies of either Greece or Midgard. Some seemed to pulse with different colors or intensities, suggesting properties beyond ordinary stellar bodies. Others appeared connected by dotted rather than solid lines, as if indicating uncertainty or variability in their relationships. "The giants understood that each realm has its own heavens," Mimir explained, "yet they recognize that all exist within a greater cosmic structure. What appears as distinct night skies to realm-bound observers are actually different perspectives of the same vast arrangement, like viewing a great tapestry from various angles." As the projected star maps continued to develop in complexity, Atreus noticed that certain constellations were emphasized more strongly than others, their lines brighter and more defined. Following these highlighted patterns, he began to discern a sequence. a story told in stellar arrangements that progressed around the chamber walls in specific order. "There's a narrative here," he said, moving clockwise around the platform to follow the sequence. "The constellations are positioned to tell a story if read in the right order." He paused at a particularly vivid section where a formation resembling a massive humanoid figure reached toward another pattern that suggested a tree with spreading branches. "See how this giant reaches toward what must be Yggdrasil. And here," he pointed to the next section, "the tree's branches extend across different levels, connecting separate star fields." Kratos followed his son's gaze, noting how certain groupings did indeed seem positioned deliberately in relation to one another. Though he lacked Atreus's intuitive connection to such matters, his tactical mind recognized intentional patterning when presented with sufficient evidence. "What story do they tell?" he asked, genuinely curious despite his habitual skepticism regarding cosmic messages. Atreus studied the patterns carefully, occasionally referring to the journal where his mother had recorded various giant constellations and their meanings. The book's pages seemed to glow slightly in the observatory's blue light, the ink shifting subtly as if responding to the surrounding energies. "It's about creation," he said finally, "but not the creation Mimir told us about, with Ymir and the sons of Bor. This is older somehow. It shows the formation of the stars themselves, the birth of light from darkness." His finger traced a progression that began with a seemingly empty section where minimal stars appeared, then moved through increasingly complex arrangements, suggesting expansion and development. "Here at the beginning, there's almost nothing, just a few points of light in the void. Then gradually, more appear, forming relationships, creating patterns." As if responding to Atreus's interpretation, the humming of the instruments changed tone, becoming deeper and more resonant. The light projections shifted, certain stars brightening while others dimmed, altering the emphasis within the overall pattern. What had been subtle now became more pronounced, the narrative progression clarifying as if confirming the boy's understanding. "I think it wants to show us something specific," Atreus suggested, looking around at the instruments. "Maybe we need to adjust them somehow." "Careful, boy," Kratos cautioned, his wariness returning. "We don't know what changes might trigger." But Atreus was already moving toward one of the instruments, a telescope-like device mounted on a bronze tripod, its crystal lens aimed at a particular section of the sky. Unlike the others, this instrument's beam appeared misaligned, projecting slightly away from where the pattern suggested it should connect. The discontinuity created a gap in one of the constellations, breaking the narrative sequence Atreus had identified. "This one's wrong," Attis said, examining the mounting mechanism. "See how the constellation is incomplete? I think it needs to be adjusted." He pointed to a portion of the wall projection, where a formation resembling a tree was missing several branches, creating an obvious break in what should have been a continuous pattern. Before Kratos could object further, Atreus carefully turned a small wheel at the instrument's base. The device pivoted slightly, its beam shifting to align properly with the projected pattern. Immediately, the missing section of constellation appeared, completing a figure that resembled a great tree with spreading branches that reached toward other star groupings. "Yggdrasil," Atreus breathed. "Not the actual world tree, but its reflection in the cosmos." He stepped back to observe the completed pattern, satisfaction evident in his expression. The stars mirror what exists in the realms, showing connections we might not otherwise recognize. The completion of this constellation triggered a reaction throughout the observatory. The humming intensified briefly, before settling into a new, harmonious pattern, and additional projections appeared, filling gaps that had previously existed in the displayed narrative. More importantly, a new set of star charts illuminated on the floor, patterns that had been invisible before but now glowed with the same blue light as the others, adding another layer of complexity to the already elaborate display. "Well done, lad," Mimir commented. "You've activated a deeper layer of the observatory's functions." The giants designed these places with progressive revelations, each correct adjustment unveiling new information previously hidden. Encouraged by this success, Atreus began to examine the other instruments more carefully, looking for similar opportunities for alignment. The observatory seemed to be responding to his presence specifically, perhaps recognizing his Jotnar heritage, or simply acknowledging sincere interest in its intended purpose. Kratos, though still cautious, assisted by moving to the larger devices that required more strength to adjust. These heavier instruments had likely been designed for giant operators, making them difficult for Atreus to manipulate alone. Together they worked through the chamber, aligning beams and completing constellations one by one. With each successful adjustment, the observatory revealed more of its secrets. New star patterns appeared, the humming tones grew richer and more complex, and the narrative displayed around the walls developed greater detail and coherence. What had begun as a creation story expanded to include cycles of cosmic time, the birth and death of stars, and patterns of energy flowing between different sectors of the universe. "It's beautiful," Atreus said as they completed another alignment. Not just the story itself, but how they chose to tell it, letting the actual stars speak, rather than imposing their own interpretation. As he spoke, a gentle breeze swirled through the open ceiling, unusually warm given their elevation and the season. With it came something unexpected. Whispers, barely audible but distinctly present, speaking in the ancient giant tongue. The voices seemed to emerge from the air itself, without specific source or direction, creating an ambient murmur that filled the chamber like the softest possible chorus. Atreus tilted his head, listening intently to these ghostly voices carried on the night wind. His expression shifted between concentration and occasional surprise, suggesting he could understand at least portions of what was being communicated. "Can you hear them?" he asked his father. Kratos nodded, his senses extending beyond normal human range to catch the ethereal communications. Though he couldn't understand the language, he recognized the cadence of scholarly discussion, measured, thoughtful exchanges focused on specific observations rather than emotional or philosophical matters. "What do they say?" Atreus closed his eyes, concentrating on the fragmented messages. The whispers seemed to respond to his attention, certain voices becoming more prominent while others receded, as if an invisible audience were rearranging itself to facilitate better communication. They're discussing the observations, comparing notes about stellar movements, calculating cycles. He opened his eyes, looking at his father with wonder. "I think we're hearing the giant astronomers who once worked here. Echoes of their conversations preserved somehow in this place. Not ghosts in the conventional sense," Mimir clarified, his own expression thoughtful. "More like impressions left in the fabric of reality through centuries of consistent thought and focus. Locations where intense intellectual or emotional activity occurred over extended periods sometimes retain echoes of those energies, particularly in realms with naturally higher magical saturation." The whispering voices continued, growing slightly clearer as more stars appeared above. Though still fragmentary, their communications conveyed deep wonder at cosmic mysteries, meticulous attention to mathematical precision, and occasional philosophical observations about patterns observed. There was a soothing quality to these ancient scholarly discussions, like overhearing dedicated researchers engaged in work they found deeply meaningful. This one is talking about connections between stellar cycles and life cycles, Atreus reported, focusing on a particular voice that seemed to address biological rather than purely astronomical matters, how certain patterns in growth and development mirror cosmic rhythms. As they completed the alignment of the final instrument, the observatory underwent its most dramatic transformation yet. The projections around the walls merged into a single, continuous panorama that depicted not just individual constellations, but an integrated model of multiple cosmic layers. At the same time, the illuminated floor patterns expanded to cover previously dark sections, revealing a complete map of celestial movements that extended beyond the chamber's physical boundaries through some trick of magical perspective. Most remarkably, a new projection appeared above the central platform, a three-dimensional representation of the 9 realms arranged around Yggdrasil, each realm displaying its own unique celestial patterns while simultaneously showing their relationships to one another. This cosmic model rotated slowly, allowing observation from different angles, its scale and detail suggesting centuries of accumulated astronomical knowledge. "Extraordinary," Mimir whispered. "A complete cosmological model, more accurate than anything the Aesir ever constructed. No wonder Odin coveted giant knowledge so desperately." The model revealed connections between realms that weren't apparent through conventional observation. Certain star patterns visible from Midgard, for instance, aligned with particular configurations seen in Alfheim when viewed from the proper perspective, suggesting underlying relationships that transcended apparent separation. Atreus moved around the projection, studying each realm with fascination. "Look, Father. There's Midgard, and here's Jotunheim. You can see how they align with each other, and how the stars visible from each have certain patterns in common despite appearing different." He pointed to a particular configuration that appeared in both realms, though from different angles and with slight variations in arrangement. This one, Mother called it the Huntress. From Midgard it looks like a woman with a bow, but from Jotunheim the same stars form what looks more like a wolf. Same stars, different perspective. Kratos observed the model with grudging appreciation. Though magic remained something he approached with caution, he recognized the value of accurate strategic information, particularly regarding realm arrangement and potential pathways between them. This display offered practical knowledge rather than mere mystical symbolism, information that could potentially assist their ongoing journey through increasingly complex interdimensional challenges. As the night deepened and the observatory's revelations plateaued, they prepared to rest before tomorrow's journey back down the mountain. Atreus spread their sleeping furs on the central platform, which offered the best view of both the star-filled sky above and the glowing projections around them. The persistent humming of the instruments had settled into a soothing background resonance that masked the howling wind outside, a gentle lullaby of cosmic observation that seemed designed to facilitate restful contemplation. "Mother told me stories about the stars," Atreus said as they settled onto their makeshift beds. The furs, warmed by proximity to one of the humming instruments, provided welcome barrier against the mountain cold that penetrated even the observatory's protective walls. Giant legends about how certain constellations came to be, but she also mentioned that you might know different stories from your homeland. He posed this last part carefully, aware of how rarely his father spoke of Greece or his previous life there. Such topics typically triggered immediate withdrawal, conversation ending abruptly as memories best left buried threatened to surface. Kratos grew still, his expression unreadable in the dim blue light. For several moments he remained silent, and Atreus prepared himself for the usual deflection or abrupt change of subject. Then, surprisingly, the god of war shifted position, looking upward through the observatory's open ceiling. There were different patterns in those skies, he admitted finally, his deep voice barely audible above the instrument's gentle humming. Different names, different stories. Will you tell me one? Atreus asked, careful not to press too hard, yet unable to hide his eagerness at this rare opening. Kratos looked upward through the observatory's open ceiling, though the constellations he sought were not visible in these northern skies. After a long moment of silence, he pointed toward the southern horizon. In my homeland, there was a formation called the Hunter, he began, his tone measured as if carefully selecting each word. A great warrior positioned eternally among the stars, bow raised in pursuit of prey that forever eluded him. Like Uller in Norse tales, Atreides noted, making a connection between cultural traditions separated by vast distances. Perhaps. But this hunter had a story of loss. He had been blinded through trickery, yet given the power to see the path of celestial bodies. He walked the boundary between darkness and light, guided by a companion. Kratos paused, seeming to consider whether to continue. As a child, I was taught to locate this constellation during winter months, when it rose highest in the night sky. Though he didn't elaborate on who had taught him, whether parent, mentor, or friend, the mere acknowledgement of his childhood represented significant sharing from a man who typically avoided all reference to his past. Atreus listened with rapt attention, knowing better than to interrupt with too many questions. Were there others you knew? He asked simply when Kratos fell silent. After another long pause, Kratos continued. There was the bear, a mother transformed to protect her child, and the sisters, 7 stars representing... He stopped, perhaps finding the memory too personal or painful to share completely. We have a bear in our skies too, Atreus offered, recognizing his father's discomfort and providing an easy transition. Mother called it Jörmungand's eye, because the stars form a spiral like her pupil when she takes serpent form. The conversation drifted gently between constellations and their various interpretations across different cultures. As they talked, the observatory responded subtly to their exchange. Certain constellations brightened when mentioned, as if the ancient instruments recognized and highlighted specific stellar arrangements, regardless of the linguistic or cultural framework used to identify them. When Kratos described the Hunter, for instance, a previously unremarkable section of the projected star map intensified, revealing a pattern that indeed resembled a human figure with arm extended, though arranged differently than the Norse Hunter Ulla. This responsive quality reinforced the impression that the observatory itself possessed a form of awareness. Not consciousness precisely, but an attentive mechanism designed to facilitate deeper understanding of the cosmos. The ancient giant astronomers had created not just a static observation post, but an interactive teaching tool that adapted to its users, emphasizing connections relevant to their specific inquiries and understanding. Do you think the stars actually influence our lives? Atreus asked eventually, his voice growing sleepy despite his continued interest in the topic. Mother said the giants believed stellar alignments could reveal potential futures, but not determine them absolutely. Kratos considered the question with unusual thoughtfulness. Typically, he dismissed such philosophical inquiries with practical observations or redirected conversation toward immediate concerns. Yet the observatory's peaceful atmosphere and the rare moment of connection with his son seemed to invite deeper reflection. Men have always sought meaning in the heavens, he replied after considering the question, looking for patterns to explain what happens in their lives. He was silent for a moment before adding, but I have found that actions not stars, determine fate. His tone carried the weight of experience. Someone who had defied prophecies and expectations through sheer force of will and decisive action. Yet there was also nuance to his response, an acknowledgement that patterns might exist without necessitating predestination. Yet perhaps the relationship is more complex than either determination or irrelevance, Mimir suggested from his position near their packs. The giants understood that cosmic patterns reflect broader natural cycles that influence all realms subtly, not control, but correlation, like how certain plants respond to moonlight or animals to seasonal changes. The conversation gradually tapered as weariness from their long journey began to claim them. Atreus's questions came less frequently, his voice growing softer as sleep approached. The gentle humming of the instruments continued its soothing background resonance, almost like a lullaby composed in mathematical precision rather than emotional expression. Above, the stars moved in their silent procession across the night sky, witnessed by the observatory as they had been for countless centuries. In this transitional state between wakefulness and sleep, with the observatory's gentle humming creating a soothing backdrop, both father and son experienced a curious sensation of expanded perspective. The immediate concerns that had driven their journey, practical questions about pathways through Jotunheim, strategic considerations regarding potential encounters with hostile forces, seemed momentarily less urgent when viewed against the cosmic tapestry displayed around them. The stars above had witnessed the rise and fall of pantheons, the birth and death of worlds. They had shone above Kratos' homeland during his youth, above Faye's mountain home when she first held Atreus in her arms, above countless beings throughout the realms whose individual struggles and triumphs blended into the greater pattern of existence. This continuity offered a strange comfort, not negating personal experience, but contextualizing it within cycles larger than individual lives, or even divine machinations. As full sleep finally claimed them, the observatory maintained its quiet activities throughout the night. Instruments adjusted minutely to track stellar movements, projections shifted to maintain accurate positioning, and the gentle humming continued its harmonious resonance. The whispering voices of ancient giant astronomers occasionally drifted through on warm currents of air, their fragmentary observations forming a scholarly lullaby that deepened restful sleep without disturbing it. Outside, the harsh mountain winds continued to howl around the observatory's stone walls, but within the circular chamber, father and son rested peacefully beneath the watchful gaze of countless stars. Whatever challenges awaited them on their continuing journey would be faced with the resilience that defined them both, yet perhaps with a slightly broadened perspective, having briefly viewed their lives against the vast cosmic canvas that encompassed all realms and all stories, including their own. Dawn arrived with gradual insistence, sunlight replacing starlight as the primary illumination within the observatory. As the first golden rays touched the instruments, their humming shifted tone, becoming brighter and more energetic, while simultaneously diminishing in volume. The projections around the walls faded slowly, star patterns dissolving as direct sunlight overwhelmed their subtle radiance. The three-dimensional model of the Nine Realms was the last to disappear, its rotating representation of Yggdrasil and the surrounding worlds gradually losing definition until only the barest outline remained, hovering momentarily above the central platform before dissipating entirely. As it vanished, the whispering voices also faded, their scholarly discussions returning to whatever dimensional pocket had preserved them through centuries of solitude. Atreus woke first, blinking in the morning light that streamed through the open ceiling. For a moment, he experienced brief disorientation, the cosmic visions of the previous night still vivid in his mind, contrasting with the more ordinary illumination of daybreak. He sat up, looking around the circular chamber with refreshed perception. By daylight, the observatory revealed new aspects not visible during the night. Intricate carvings decorated the stone between instruments. Not just astronomical symbols, but scenes depicting giant astronomers at work, their proportions appropriately massive compared to the delicate instruments they manipulated. In some carvings, these figures appeared to be teaching others, suggesting the observatory had served as both research facility and educational institution. The illuminated floor patterns had faded with the arrival of sunlight, but the inlaid star charts remained visible, their darker stone contrasting with the pale floor surface. Atris could now see weathering that hadn't been apparent by night. Small cracks where moisture had penetrated during countless freeze-thaw cycles. Erosion patterns where particularly strong winds had gradually worn away small details of the carvings. "It's been abandoned for a long time," he said quietly, not wanting to wake his father just yet, "but it still works perfectly after all these years. Built to last, like all giant craftsmanship," Mimir replied, his voice equally hushed. "They constructed with millennia in mind, not merely centuries." This observatory was likely designed to continue functioning long after its creators had departed, preserving their knowledge for future generations. "But they couldn't have known their entire race would disappear," Atreus said, a touch of sadness coloring his voice as he contemplated the empty realm around them. "Perhaps not specifically," Mimir conceded, "though the giants had greater foresight than most. They might have recognized their civilization faced existential threats and taken measures to ensure their knowledge, at least, would survive." Kratos stirred then, transitioning from sleep to full wakefulness with the immediate alertness of a warrior accustomed to potential danger. He sat up, quickly assessing their surroundings before relaxing marginally upon confirming no threats had manifested during the night. "The storm has passed," he observed, noting the clear blue sky visible through the open ceiling. "We should begin our descent while conditions remain favorable." They prepared for departure efficiently, gathering their limited supplies and ensuring no trace of their presence remained beyond the adjusted instruments, which they decided to leave in their aligned positions. As they worked, Atreus continued to study the observatory's details with the thoroughness his mother had instilled in him, not just observing but understanding, connecting each element to its purpose within the greater design. "I wish we could stay longer," he admitted as they completed their preparations. "There's so much more to learn here." "The knowledge isn't lost," Kratos reminded him, his practical nature focusing on what could be carried rather than what must be left behind. "You've seen how it works. What matters can be remembered." There was wisdom in this perspective that transcended mere practicality. The observatory had demonstrated that knowledge existed at multiple levels. The physical instruments were merely facilitators for understanding that, once grasped, resided within the observer rather than the tools that had enabled initial perception. This aligned with what Faye had consistently taught her son, the importance of internalizing wisdom rather than merely collecting information. Atreus nodded, recognizing the truth in his father's observation. He made one final circuit of the chamber, committing key details to memory and making quick sketches in his journal of particularly important symbols or mechanisms. These records would preserve at least some portion of the observatory's knowledge, allowing future reference without requiring physical return to this remote location. As they prepared to depart, something unexpected occurred. A panel in the observatory floor, previously indistinguishable from the surrounding stone, slid open near the central platform, revealing a small compartment containing a cylindrical object, approximately the length of Atreus's forearm. "What's this?" Ithris asked, kneeling beside the opening. "Caution," Kratos warned, moving closer to examine this new development. Atreus carefully lifted the object from its compartment. It appeared to be a scroll case made of a silvery metal similar to the instruments, its surface inscribed with the same astronomical symbols that decorated the observatory walls. End caps of polished crystal sealed the container, revealing hints of something blue glowing faintly within. "I believe that's a star chart," Mimir observed. "A portable version of the knowledge contained in this observatory, created specifically for transport rather than mere reference." The disembodied head studied the object with scholarly interest. "Note the craftsmanship, how the container itself incorporates protective enchantments designed to preserve the contents regardless of external conditions. The giants created similar vessels for particularly valuable knowledge they wished to ensure would survive even catastrophic events. It responded to our adjustments," Atreus realized. "The observatory recognized that we understood its purpose and offered this as, what? A reward? A tool? Perhaps both," Mimir suggested. Giant craftsmanship often incorporated response mechanisms designed to recognize genuine understanding. If you correctly demonstrated comprehension of the observatory's principles, it might be programmed to provide additional resources to continue those studies elsewhere. After careful examination confirmed no obvious dangers, Atreus secured the scroll case in his pack. As he did so, the floor panel slid closed once more, returning to its previous seamless state. The observatory had shared what it deemed appropriate, neither more nor less, maintaining its ancient purpose as preserver and transmitter of cosmic knowledge. With a final look around the circular chamber that had offered such remarkable insights during their brief stay, they ducked through the low archway and emerged onto the mountain's summit. The morning sun cast long shadows across the snow-covered peak, while the air, clear after the night's storm, offered breathtaking visibility. From this elevation, they could see vast swaths of Jotunheim spread out below, a landscape of majestic desolation that emphasized both the realm's natural grandeur and the profound absence of its creators. As they began their descent along the same narrow path they had climbed the previous day, Atreus found his thoughts returning to the observatory and its revelations. Beyond the specific astronomical knowledge it had preserved, the ancient structure offered something perhaps more valuable: perspective. The cosmic view had momentarily lifted their attention from immediate concerns to broader patterns, from personal challenges to universal cycles. "Do you think Mother knew what we would find here?" he asked, as they navigated a particularly steep section of the path. Kratos considered the question with his characteristic thoroughness before responding. "Your mother rarely acted without purpose. If she recorded this location in her journal, she intended us to discover it, whether now or later." This assessment aligned with what they had learned about Faye throughout their journey. Her careful preparation, her seemingly prescient guidance that continued even after her death, through the markers and messages she had left for them to find. The observatory visit likely represented another step in whatever larger plan she had envisioned, though its specific purpose within that design remained unclear. "Indeed," Mimir agreed. "Faye had remarkable foresight regarding what knowledge you might need at various stages of your journey. This visit has provided not just information about stellar arrangements, but a framework for understanding how different realms relate to one another, potentially crucial for whatever lies ahead." The disembodied head elaborated on how astronomical knowledge often provided foundations for more advanced magical understanding, particularly regarding travel between realms or communication across dimensional boundaries. The scroll case they now carried might contain insights that would prove essential for navigating challenges yet to be encountered. Atreus nodded, finding comfort in this connection to his mother's continuing guidance. Though physically absent, her wisdom remained present through the breadcrumbs of knowledge she had left for them to discover at moments when they could best appreciate their significance. Their descent proceeded more efficiently than the previous day's ascent, familiarity with the path allowing more confident navigation despite occasional treacherous sections. Where frozen handholds had required careful testing during their climb, they now moved with greater assurance, having already identified stable points and dangerous areas to avoid. Throughout the journey downward, Atreus occasionally reached back to touch the scroll case in his pack, reassuring himself of its continued presence. Though they had yet to examine its contents, the object's mere existence provided tangible connection to the extraordinary experience they had shared, proof that the night's revelations had been more than dreams or temporary magical manifestation. As they continued their descent, the morning sun warming their backs, Ater found himself occasionally glancing upward at the blue sky where, invisible during daylight but eternally present, countless stars continued their cosmic dance. The giant's observatory had reminded him that some things remained constant, despite personal or even divine turmoil. Patterns larger than gods or mortals, cycles that continued regardless of who observed them. This perspective didn't diminish the importance of their immediate journey or the challenges they would inevitably face. Rather, it contextualized these experiences within broader patterns, offering subtle reassurance that even the most difficult moments existed within larger cycles of change and continuity. Like stars whose light traveled years before becoming visible, actions and choices carried consequences beyond immediate perception, connecting to patterns that might only become apparent with sufficient distance and perspective. With the crystalline scroll secure in his pack, and the observatory's insights fresh in his mind, Atreus followed his father down the mountain path. Whatever adventures awaited them in the days ahead would be approached with renewed clarity, their cosmic night having provided not just rest, but subtle illumination. Stars guiding their way, not through direct intervention, but through the quiet wisdom of ancient patterns, eternally present for those who learn to see them. As they descended further, leaving the summit's intense cold for the slightly milder climate of lower elevations, Kratos observed his son with quiet assessment. The boy moved differently today, a subtle shift in how he carried himself, how he observed their surroundings. Not dramatic transformation, but the small yet significant change that comes with expanded perspective. The observatory had affected him, not just with specific knowledge, but in deeper ways that might continue to develop long after they had left the mountain behind. This, perhaps, had been Faye's intention all along, not merely providing information, but creating experiences that would shape their son's understanding in ways mere instruction could not. From the limited glimpses Kratos had received of his wife's methods, he recognized this pattern of indirect teaching, setting conditions for discovery rather than simply presenting conclusions to be memorized. A method not unlike the stars themselves, he reflected, offering illumination without imposing direction, providing reference points while leaving the journey itself to those who observed their patterns. As Kratos and Atreus made their final descent from the giant's observatory, the crystalline scroll safely tucked away in Atreus' pack, they couldn't know that their cosmic discoveries would soon be complemented by another ancient wonder, hidden deep beneath Midgard's surface. For while the stars had shared their silent wisdom from above, another form of ancient knowledge awaited below, where echoes of the past resonated through stone passages carved by forces both natural and divine. The glacial winds of Jotunheim howled across the mountain range, carrying with them a flurry of snow that reduced visibility to mere arm's length. Kratos and Atreus had been traveling since dawn, their journey to map the far reaches of the giant realm slowed considerably by the sudden storm that had descended upon them without warning. The cold was bitter, even by Jotunheim standards, the kind that found its way through furs and leathers to bite at exposed skin with merciless persistence. "We need shelter," Kratos announced, his deep voice barely audible above the shrieking wind. His breath formed thick clouds before his face, and frost had begun to gather in his beard. "This storm will not pass quickly." Atreus, hood pulled tightly around his face, squinted through the white haze. Despite the challenging conditions, the boy's keen eyes had been steadily improving at navigating Jotunheim's treacherous landscape. After all, this was the land of his mother's people. Something in his blood seemed to resonate with these mountains, allowing him to see pathways where others might find only sheer rock faces or impassable terrain. "There," he called out, pointing toward what appeared to be a darker shadow against the endless white. "I think I see an opening in the mountainside." Kratos followed his son's direction, trusting the boy's sight more than his own in these matters. Together they trudged through snow that reached mid-calf, each step requiring deliberate effort against the mounting drifts. As they drew closer, the shadow resolved into a narrow fissure in the rock face, not immediately obvious as a cave entrance, but promising potential shelter from the relentless storm. "It might not go deep enough," Atreus said, doubt creeping into his voice as they approached, "but it's better than nothing." Kratos examined the opening with a practiced eye. "Stay behind me," he instructed, drawing the Leviathan axe as a precaution. Wild creatures often sought the same protection from storms, and in Jotunheim, even the wildlife could prove formidable. The entrance was narrow enough that Kratos had to turn sideways to pass through, his broad shoulders nearly touching both walls of the fissure. Atreus slipped through with greater ease, following closely behind his father. The passageway extended only a few yards before opening unexpectedly into a much larger space, a genuine cavern that stretched beyond the reach of their vision. Most surprising was not the cavern's size, but the gentle illumination that greeted them. The floor and lower walls were covered with patches of pale blue-green moss that emitted a soft phosphorescent glow, providing just enough light to navigate by without straining their eyes. The abrupt transition from the howling white chaos outside to this calm, dimly lit sanctuary was almost disorienting. "It's beautiful," Atreus whispered, his voice carrying strangely in the space, not echoing exactly, but seeming to linger in the air longer than it should. Kratos remained vigilant, scanning the visible portions of the cavern for signs of current inhabitants. Finding none, he finally lowered his axe, though he kept it ready in his hand. "We will rest here until the storm passes," he decided, the practical needs of shelter and warmth taking precedence over any lingering caution. The temperature inside the cavern, while still cold, was significantly more bearable than the cutting wind outside. The rock walls provided a natural barrier against the worst of the storm, and the complete absence of wind allowed their body's natural heat to remain close, rather than being continuously stripped away. As Atreus moved deeper into the cavern, exploring with the natural curiosity of youth, Kratos set about establishing a more proper camp. From his pack he produced dry kindling and tinder, materials he always carried for precisely such situations. Finding a suitable location where the smoke might find its way out through small fissures in the ceiling, he began the process of building a small fire. "Father, you should see this," Athos called from further within the cavern. These walls, they're different from any cave I've seen before. Kratos, having successfully ignited the kindling, allowed the fire a moment to establish itself before moving to join his son. As he approached, he noticed what had caught the boy's attention. Unlike the rough, jagged surfaces typical of natural caves, the walls here were remarkably smooth, almost polished in appearance, with subtle undulations that seemed deliberate rather than formed by random erosion. These weren't made by water or ice, Atreus observed, running his hand gently over the smooth stone. These were shaped intentionally. Kratos examined the walls with greater attention. The boy was right. The surfaces bore the unmistakable signs of deliberate craftsmanship, though using methods he was not familiar with. Jotnar work, he concluded. The giants were known for their mastery of stone, creating structures that often blurred the line between natural formation and constructed space. As his hand touched the wall, Kratos felt a subtle vibration, not threatening, but unusual. The stone seemed to respond to his touch in a way that ordinary rock would not. Before he could comment on this observation, Atreus spoke again. "Look at how the moss grows," the boy said, pointing to the patterns of bioluminescent vegetation. "It's not random, it follows specific paths, like it was planted this way." Indeed, upon closer inspection, the glowing moss appeared to form deliberate patterns, spirals and flowing lines that recalled the distinctive artwork they had seen in other Jotnar structures. Some portions of the wall were intentionally left bare, creating negative space that contributed to the overall design. As they ventured deeper into the cavern system, the passage gradually widened until it opened into a vast chamber that drew gasps from both travelers. The ceiling soared at least 30 feet above them, and the space extended in all directions beyond the reach of the moss's gentle illumination. What made the chamber truly remarkable, however, were the numerous stone formations that rose from the floor. Smooth, curved structures that resembled frozen waves, or perhaps enormous musical instruments. Between these formations lay perfectly still pools of water, their surfaces so placid they appeared solid, until a droplet from the ceiling would occasionally break the mirror-like surface, sending ripples outward in perfect concentric circles. The entire chamber seemed designed with sound in mind, every surface shaped to direct and capture acoustic waves in specific ways. "Father," Atreus whispered, his voice carrying with unusual clarity, "I think this is a..." Before he could complete his thought, something extraordinary happened. The stone formation nearest to them began to emit a soft golden glow, and from it came a voice, deep, resonant, and speaking in the ancient Jotnar language that Atreus had been steadily learning throughout their journeys. The boy's eyes widened in astonishment. "It's responding to our voices," he said, his words barely audible even in the chamber's perfect acoustics. "This isn't just a cave, it's some kind of recording place." Kratos approached the glowing formation cautiously, axe ready, though he sensed no immediate threat. "What did it say?" he asked, his own deep voice causing another formation across the chamber to illuminate briefly. Atreus concentrated, translating the brief message he had heard. Something about "welcome to the memory halls." I think that's what it called this place. Minir Hallir in the old tongue. The memory halls. As if responding to the boy's translations, several of the stone formations began to glow simultaneously, each emitting different voices, speaking phrases too brief and overlapping to be clearly understood. The effect was both beautiful and unsettling. Fragments of conversations from long ago playing simultaneously, like standing in a busy gathering where one could catch only snippets of the discussions taking place. The Jotnar were known for their preservation of knowledge, Atreus explained, drawing on lessons taught by his mother. But I always thought they used runes and carvings, like the ones we've seen in their shrines. This is different. Kratos surveyed the chamber with newfound understanding. This is not merely preservation, he observed. This is conversation across time. The concept was profound. A method of storing not just information, but voices themselves, allowing future generations to hear the actual words and tones of their ancestors, not simply reading accounts of the past, but experiencing them directly through sound. Experimentally, Atreus spoke a phrase in the Jotnar language, a simple greeting his mother had taught him. The response was immediate and surprising. Multiple formations throughout the chamber illuminated, each replaying what sounded like the same greeting but spoken by different voices. Some deep and authoritative, others light and weathered by time. It captures words and plays them back when it hears similar sounds, Atreus realized, his excitement growing. The Jotnar would come here to record important stories and knowledge, speaking to the stone, and future generations could retrieve those recordings by using the right words. Kratos, always more concerned with practical matters, began assessing the chamber's suitability as temporary shelter. The storm outside continued unabated, its howling still audible even through the thick mountain rock. They might be here for some time. We will make camp near the entrance where our fire is established, he decided. But first, gather what information you can from this place. Knowledge of the Jotnar may prove useful in our journey. Atreus nodded eagerly, already moving toward another formation that had begun to glow softly in response to their conversation. As he approached, a gentle voice, feminine and measured, began to speak in the ancient language. The boy listened intently, his expression shifting from concentration to wonder. It's a teaching, he explained to his father. Instructions on how to use the memory halls properly. He continued listening, occasionally nodding as he absorbed the information. The formations respond to specific tones and cadences. If you want to record something, you need to stand near a formation that isn't already filled and speak with clear intention. If you want to hear what's recorded, you need to use phrases similar to what was originally spoken. Kratos grunted acknowledgement, impressed despite himself by the sophistication of the system. The Jotnar continued to reveal themselves as far more advanced than most gave them credit for, their technologies often disguised as natural formations or simple stonework. As Atreus continued exploring, experimentally speaking phrases that might trigger different recordings, Kratos returned to their camp near the entrance to tend the fire. The small flames cast dancing shadows on the cavern walls, creating an almost hypnotic visual complement to the occasional distant voices that Atreus was activating deeper within the system. When the boy eventually returned to the fire, his eyes were bright with excitement and his journal was filled with hastily scribbled notes. "Father, this place is amazing," he said, settling down on his bedroll across from Kratos. The Jotnar used it as a living library, not just for important historical records, but for everyday things too. I heard children's stories, poems, even arguments between what sounded like council members debating some long-forgotten policy. Kratos poked at the fire, encouraging the flames to grow slightly before adding another small piece of wood. "And this helps us how?" he asked, though not unkindly. His practical nature always sought the immediate value in new discoveries. "Well," Atreus began thoughtfully, "for one thing, I heard several references to hidden pathways through these mountains. Shortcuts that could save us days of travel once this storm passes. But, more importantly..." He hesitated, suddenly uncertain. "Speak your mind, boy," Kratos encouraged. "I think Mother might have visited here," Atreus said finally. "Some of the more recent recordings, They mention a guardian who came from Midgard, seeking knowledge about... He trailed off, looking down at his hands. About what? Kratos prompted, his full attention now on his son. About raising a child of mixed heritage, Atreus finished quietly. A half-giant, half-god child who would face unique challenges. A heavy silence fell between them, broken only by the gentle crackling of the fire and the distant howl of the storm. Faye had always been selective about what knowledge she shared, even with Kratos. That she would seek out specific information about raising their son, preparing for challenges she anticipated but never discussed, was both touching and somewhat troubling. "Did you hear her voice?" Kratos asked finally, his tone carefully neutral. Atreus shook his head. "No, just references to her visits, but..." He brightened slightly. "The recordings suggest she left messages of her own. If we could find the right phrases to trigger them." Kratos considered this possibility. Part of him wanted to dismiss the notion immediately. What was past, and dwelling on Faye's words now could only distract from their current purpose. But another part, one he rarely acknowledged, recognized the potential value for Kratos. The boy had lost his mother before learning many of the things she had surely intended to teach him. Tomorrow, he decided. After we have rested. The storm shows no sign of abating, and we have shelter and warmth. We can afford to spend time exploring these memory halls more thoroughly. Relief and gratitude washed over Atreus's face. "Thank you, Father," he said simply. As the evening progressed, they shared a modest meal from their travel provisions, supplemented by melted snow water that proved remarkably sweet and pure. The constant soft glow of the moss created an atmosphere conducive to rest, and the distant, occasional sounds of ancient voices, too far away to be understood, but present nonetheless, added a strange sense of company to their isolation. "The recordings," Atreus said as they prepared for sleep, "they're not just information. They're comforting somehow. Like the cave itself is populated with friendly spirits." Kratos, ever wary of entities beyond the mortal realm, might normally have cautioned against such sentiment, but in this place, he found himself inclined to agree. The voices held no malice, sought nothing from them, represented no threat. They were simply echoes of people long gone, preserved in stone through ingenious Jotnar craftsmanship. "Rest now," he told his son. "Tomorrow we will listen more carefully to what this place has to share." Atreus nodded, settling into his bedroll and allowing his eyes to close. The gentle phosphorescence, the distant murmur of ancient voices, and the steady breathing of his father nearby created a cocoon of safety that quickly lulled him towards sleep. Kratos remained awake longer, his warrior's instincts never fully surrendering to unconsciousness in unfamiliar surroundings. Yet even he eventually found himself drifting into unusually peaceful rest, the memory halls seeming to extend some subtle protection that allowed for deeper relaxation than he typically permitted himself. Outside, the storm continued its assault on the mountain, but within the Echo Caverns, father and son slept peacefully, surrounded by the whispered stories of giants long departed from the realm they once called home. Morning in the caverns arrived without the usual visual cues of dawn. No sunlight penetrated the thick rock to signal the beginning of a new day. Instead, Kratos and Atreus awoke by their own internal rhythms, the fire having burned down to glowing embers during their rest. A quick trip to the cave entrance confirmed that the storm had not diminished. If anything, it appeared to have intensified overnight, with snow now completely obscuring the opening they had entered through. "We aren't leaving today," Kratos observed, returning to their camp. The passage is blocked with snow, and the wind would make clearing it futile until the storm relents. Rather than showing disappointment, Atreus seemed pleased by the news. That gives us more time to explore the memory halls, he said, already gathering his journal and writing implements. I want to try some of the techniques I learned yesterday for activating specific types of recordings. After a brief meal to break their fast, they ventured deeper into the cavern system together. This time, Atreus led with greater confidence, having spent the previous evening mapping the main chambers in his journal and noting which formations had responded to different types of speech. The Jotnar organized their recordings by subject, he explained as they walked. Some formations hold historical accounts, others contain songs or poems. Still others preserve practical knowledge like crafting techniques or medicinal preparations. They entered a smaller chamber branching off from the main hall, this one featuring a circular arrangement of stone formations surrounding a central pool. The water here was different from the other pools they had seen, slightly clouded with minerals that gave it a milky, opalescent appearance. The moss grew more abundantly here, its glow creating shifting patterns of light on the water's surface. This chamber is for family histories, Atreus said, consulting his notes. Personal accounts, lineages, stories passed down within specific bloodlines. He looked up at Kratos, excitement evident in his expression. If Mother left any messages, they're most likely here. Kratos nodded, allowing his son to take the lead in this exploration. The boy approached the edge of the central pool, considering his options before speaking. When he finally did speak, it was in careful Jotnar language, his pronunciation deliberate and measured. Several of the surrounding formations illuminated in response, but rather than playing back immediate recordings, they seemed to be awaiting further specification. Atreus frowned slightly, consulting his notes again before trying another phrase. This time, a single formation to their right responded, its glow intensifying as a voice emerged. Elderly but strong, speaking in measured tones that suggested formal recitation. Atreus listened intently, occasionally translating portions for his father's benefit. This is a lineage recitation, he explained, tracing a family line through many generations, naming significant accomplishments of each member. He continued listening, his expression growing increasingly focused. It's Mother's family line, he said suddenly. This must be one of the recordings she came to study. Kratos moved closer, the mention of Fae capturing his full attention. Though he could not understand the Jotnar language directly, he found himself listening to the cadence and tone of the voice, imagining Fae sitting in this very chamber, absorbing the history of her ancestors. The recording continued for several minutes, the elderly voice methodically working through generations of giants, occasionally pausing to elaborate on particularly noteworthy individuals. Atreus took rapid notes, his quill scratching softly against the parchment of his journal. Her bloodline was connected to the first giants who mastered prophecy, the boy said with evident awe. That explains why her foresight was so strong compared to other Jotnar. He continued listening, his expression shifting between concentration and occasional surprise. The speaker mentions a final guardian who would be born of this line, the last to carry certain gifts. Fae, Kratos said, the word emerging more as statement than question. Atreus nodded. I think so. The recording is old, probably made centuries before she was born, but it seems to be describing her role. His brow furrowed in concentration. Though some of the phrasing is strange, like they weren't entirely certain what form this final guardian would take, or exactly what choices she would make. The recording eventually faded, the formation's glow diminishing to its previous subtle luminescence. Atreus studied his notes for a moment, before turning to another formation that had shown response to his initial query. "Let me try something more specific," he said, speaking another phrase in Jotnar, this one including what Kratos recognized as Faye's true name, Laufey. The response was immediate and startling. A formation they had not previously noticed, smaller than the others and partially obscured by a growth of the phosphorescent moss, began to emit a warm golden light. The voice that emerged from it caused both Kratos and Atreus to freeze in place, momentarily unable to move or speak. It was Faye's voice. The sound of it filled the chamber with a presence so familiar and so missed that it created an almost physical ache. Her distinctive tone, gentle yet strong, musical yet precise, spoke in the Jonar language with the slight accent she had developed during her years in Midgard. Atreus's eyes immediately welled with tears, and even Kratos found himself uncharacteristically still, every sense focused on the sound of his wife's voice, echoing through the chamber. "She's giving an account of her journey from Midgard to Jotunheim," Atreus translated, his voice thick with emotion. "She came here while..." He paused, listening more carefully. "While carrying me. Before I was born." This revelation caused Kratos to turn sharply toward his son, surprise evident even through his typically stoic expression. Faye had made this difficult journey while pregnant, something she had never mentioned to him. The fact shouldn't have been surprising. Faye had always been both capable and determined, often undertaking tasks that would challenge even the strongest warriors. Still, the thought of her traversing the dangerous path between realms while carrying their child added yet another layer to his respect for her strength. "She says she came seeking guidance," Atreus continued, translating as the recording played on. "The birth of a child with mixed divine heritage, giant and..." He hesitated, glancing at his father before continuing. "Greek god. Presented unique challenges she wanted to prepare for." The recording continued, Faye's voice remaining steady as she described consulting various sources of Jotnar wisdom, seeking specific information about children of combined bloodlines. According to her account, such births were rare but not unprecedented, though the particular combination of Jotnar and Greek divine essence had never been documented. She was worried about how the different aspects of divine heritage might conflict within me. Athair explained, still translating. "Jotnar children often develop abilities gradually, usually beginning around adolescence, while godly powers can manifest unpredictably, sometimes triggered by emotional states." Kratos listened intently, recognizing the practical concerns that would have driven Faye to seek this knowledge. His own godhood had brought as much suffering as power, and the thought of his son facing similar challenges would have weighed heavily on both parents. The recording shifted then, Faye's tone becoming more personal and less formal, as if she had satisfied the official purpose of her visit and was now leaving a more intimate message. Atreus's translation became more halting, his emotion making it difficult to maintain the steady flow of interpretation. "She says she hopes someday I might find this place, that she intends to bring me here when I'm older, but if circumstances prevent that," he swallowed hard, "she wants me to know she has left guidance for me throughout the realms. Markers I'll be able to follow when the time is right." Kratos placed a hand on his son's shoulder, offering silent support as the boy continued translating his mother's words. "The last part is directly to me," Atreus said, his voice barely above a whisper. "She says, 'My son, if you are hearing this without me beside you, know that I have prepared you as best I could for the journey ahead. Your path may seem unclear, but you have within you the wisdom of the Jotnar and the strength of the gods. Most importantly, you have a heart that knows kindness and that will guide you more surely than any prophecy or divine power. As Faye's voice faded, the chamber fell into profound silence. Even the distant sounds of other formations seemed to have quieted, as if in respect for the moment. Atreus wiped tears from his cheeks, though he made no attempt to hide them from his father. Kratos, for his part, remained outwardly composed, though his hand on Atreus' shoulder had tightened slightly during the translation. Faye's words, her foresight in preparing for a future where she might not be present, reminded him yet again of the extraordinary woman he had chosen to share his life with, however briefly. She knew, Atreus said finally, looking up at his father. She knew she might not be there to teach me everything herself. Yes, Kratos acknowledged. Your mother saw many possibilities and prepared for them all. He paused, considering his next words carefully. That was her strength, not just seeing what might come, but ensuring those she loved would be ready to face it. Atreus nodded, drawing comfort from his father's rare moment of openness. After allowing himself a few more moments to absorb the emotional impact of hearing his mother's voice, the boy straightened his shoulders and turned his attention back to his notes. I want to try finding more specific recordings, he said, his voice steadier now. Mother mentioned guidance. She might have left more detailed messages about things she wanted me to know. Kratos nodded his approval, recognizing the value in allowing Atreus to process his feelings through continued activity, rather than dwelling solely on the emotional aspects of their discovery. The boy approached another formation, this one taller and more slender than the others, resembling an elongated water droplet frozen in stone. This time, instead of speaking in the formal Jotnar language, Atreus tried a simple phrase in Norse, one Faye had often used when beginning their lessons together. The response surprised them both. Instead of a single voice, the formation released what sounded like multiple recordings layered together. Faye's voice at different times, teaching different subjects, all triggered by the same introductory phrase. Realizing the need for greater specificity, Atreus added another word to his request, lullaby, and the overlapping voices resolved into a single, clear recording. Faye began to sing, her voice gentle and melodic, performing a song that Atreus clearly recognized from his earliest childhood. She used to sing this to me when I couldn't sleep, the boy explained, a bittersweet smile crossing his face. It's a Jotnar lullaby about the northern lights, how they represent the spirits of ancestors watching over their descendants. The song continued, its melody hauntingly beautiful as it resonated through the chamber's perfect acoustics. Even Kratos, not typically moved by music, found himself appreciating both the technical skill of Faye's singing and the evident love with which she performed this simple bedtime song for their child. As they continued their exploration, Atreus discovered numerous recordings Faye had left, some practical lessons about Jotnar history and culture, others more personal messages about family lineage and heritage. Each one provided another piece of the knowledge she had intended to pass down to her son over many years of instruction. In one particularly significant recording, she described various techniques for controlling and channeling the innate magical abilities that Jotnar children typically developed. It became clear that she had anticipated Atreus's eventual manifestation of these powers and had prepared specific guidance to help him navigate the transition safely. This explains a lot, Atreus said after translating this section. The techniques she taught me for archery and hunting, they weren't just about accuracy with a bow, they were preparing me to control magical abilities she knew would emerge eventually. Kratos, who had witnessed his son's growing power firsthand throughout their journey, recognized the wisdom in Faye's approach. Rather than telling the boy outright about abilities he wasn't ready to understand, she had built a foundation of skills that would serve him when those powers eventually manifested. As the day progressed, marked only by their own sense of time in the unchanging environment of the caverns, they paused periodically to rest and reflect on what they had learned. During one such break, seated near a particularly beautiful pool where crystalline formations caught and amplified the moss's gentle light, Atreus posed a question that had clearly been on his mind. "Father," he began hesitantly, "do you think we could leave recordings of our own? Add our voices to the memory halls for others who might come after?" Kratos considered the question with his typical thoroughness. His initial instinct was to refuse. He had spent much of his existence trying to erase his presence from history rather than preserving it. Yet something about this place, with its gentle accumulation of voices across time, suggested a different kind of remembrance than the monuments and statues that had been erected to gods in his homeland. "What would you record?" he asked finally, neither approving nor refusing outright. Atreus thought for a moment. "I'd want to continue Mother's work, add what we've learned in our journeys, the truths we've discovered that contradict what's commonly believed about the Nine Realms." He looked around at the chamber. This place preserves knowledge that might otherwise be lost. That seems important. Kratos nodded slowly. The boy's reasoning was sound. Preserving truth in a world where powerful beings often distorted it to serve their own purposes held undeniable value. "And you believe you can activate the recording function based on what you've learned?" "I think so," Atreus replied, consulting his notes. "The instructions the voice gave yesterday were pretty clear. We need to find formations that haven't been used. They have a slightly different resonance when you tap them, and then speak with clear intention while touching the stone." After a brief rest and some nourishment from their provisions, they set about finding suitable unoccupied formations. This proved more challenging than expected. The memory halls had apparently been in use for centuries, with most of the easily accessible formations already containing recordings. Eventually, in a smaller side chamber they had not previously explored, Atreus discovered several formations that produced the distinctive hollow tone when gently tapped that indicated availability for new recordings. This chamber was particularly beautiful, featuring a ceiling studded with crystal formations that caught and refracted the moss light like countless tiny stars. "This feels right," Atreus decided, approaching one of the empty formations. A smoothly curved structure about his own height, with a surface that rippled slightly like liquid glass, despite being solid stone. Following the instructions he had translated earlier, he placed his palm flat against the surface and closed his eyes, gathering his thoughts before speaking. When he began, his voice was surprisingly confident and clear, first in Norse and then transitioning smoothly to the Jotnar language his mother had taught him. He spoke of their journey since Faye's death, the scattering of her ashes, their encounters with gods and monsters, the truths they had uncovered about Odin and Thor, the allies they had made along the way. Most significantly, he addressed the nature of prophecy itself, how their choices had already altered what had once seemed fixed, how Faye's careful preparations had created opportunities for change rather than mere acceptance of fate. He spoke with wisdom beyond his years, synthesizing lessons learned from both his mother's Jotnar heritage and his father's hard-won experience. Throughout this recording, Kratos listened with poorly concealed pride. The boy had absorbed far more than he had realized, not just accumulating knowledge, but developing genuine understanding. When Atreus finally stepped back from the formation, which now glowed softly with stored energy, Kratos offered a rare nod of approval that meant more to the boy than any verbose praise might have. "Your turn, father," Atreus said, gesturing toward another empty formation nearby. Kratos hesitated, his reluctance evident. "I am not a storyteller," he said simply. "You don't have to be," Atreus countered. "Just speak truly, that's what this place is for, preserving truths that might otherwise be forgotten." After several moments of internal deliberation, Kratos approached the indicated formation. Unlike his son, he didn't immediately place his hand on the stone, instead standing before it in silent contemplation of what, if anything, he wished to contribute to this ancient repository of voices. When he finally did step forward and place his palm against the cool surface, the words came more easily than he had expected. He spoke in Greek, his native tongue, knowing that few in these realms would understand it directly, but feeling that the language itself was part of the truth he wished to preserve. He spoke briefly but directly about godhood as he had experienced it, not as the glorious state depicted in myths and legends, but as a burden that demanded constant vigilance against one's worst instincts. He described how divinity, in his experience, amplified one's nature rather than transforming it, making the vengeful more destructive, the compassionate more healing, the arrogant more tyrannical. Most surprisingly to Atreus, who understood only fragments of the Greek language, his father then spoke about fatherhood, how the responsibility of guiding a child had proved more challenging and more rewarding than any battle he had ever fought, how watching his son grow in wisdom and ability had become a source of pride he had never anticipated experiencing. When Kratos finished and stepped back from the formation, now glowing with stored words, Atreus pretended not to notice the unusual softness in his father's typically stern expression. Some things, the boy had learned, were best acknowledged silently rather than commented upon directly. Together they made one final recording, this one in Norse, so that any future travelers from Midgard might understand it. They described the location of the Echo Caverns and their purpose, ensuring that this remarkable Jotnar achievement would not be forgotten, even as the giants themselves had largely vanished from the Nine Realms. As they completed this final contribution to the memory halls, Atreus noticed that the constant howl of the storm, which had been audible even through the thick mountain rock, had finally begun to diminish. A trip to the entrance confirmed what they had suspected. The blizzard was relenting, and soon they would be able to continue their journey. "We should prepare to depart," Kratos said, practical as always. "Once the snow stops completely, we will clear the entrance and resume our path." Atreus nodded, though his expression showed reluctance to leave this extraordinary place. "I wish we could stay longer," he admitted. "There's so much more to learn here." "The caverns have existed for centuries," Kratos reminded him. "They will remain. We can return when our current journey is complete." This promise of future exploration seemed to satisfy the boy, who set about gathering his belongings and organizing his extensive notes on what they had discovered. As they packed their limited provisions and prepared to eventually depart, Atreus made one final trip to the chamber where they had first heard Faye's voice. Standing before the formation that held his mother's recording, he spoke a simple phrase of gratitude in the Jotnar language. The stone responded with a brief illumination, as if acknowledging his words. No voice emerged. He had not phrased his statement as a query. but the gentle glow provided its own form of response. When he returned to their camp near the entrance, Kratos was checking the weather conditions by reaching through the partially cleared opening. "The storm has passed," he reported. "We can leave within the hour, once we have fully cleared the passage." Atreus nodded, shouldering his pack and securing his bow. Before they began the work of clearing their exit, however, he turned to look back into the depths of the cavern system, the gentle phosphorescence still visible in the distance. "The stories we heard, the things we learned about Mother and her people," he began thoughtfully. "They don't make me miss her less, but they help me understand her better. Why she did the things she did. Why she taught me the way she taught me." He looked up at his father. "It's like she's still teaching us, even now." Kratos considered this observation with unusual openness, finding truth in the boy's words that he could not deny. "Your mother was wise in ways I often failed to recognize," he admitted. "She prepared for possibilities I would not have considered." Together, they worked to clear the remaining snow from the entrance, using Kratos' strength and Atreus' dexterity to efficiently remove the blockage. As daylight finally streamed into the passage, illuminating the entrance chamber with natural light for the first time since their arrival, the contrast with the cavern's soft phosphorescence was striking, a reminder of their transition back to the world of immediate concerns and continuing journey. Before stepping out into the bright, snow-covered landscape, Atreus paused once more, looking back into the depths of the Echo Caverns. "We'll return someday," he said, not as a question, but as a statement of intention. Kratos placed a hand on his son's shoulder, the gesture conveying more than words could express. "Yes," he agreed simply. "We will." As they emerged into the crisp, cold air of Jotunheim, the storm's passage had left behind a transformed world. Snow blanketed everything in pristine white, unmarked by tracks or trails, while the sky above had cleared to a deep, perfect blue. The sun reflected brilliantly off the snow, creating a dazzling brightness that required momentary adjustment after the gentle illumination of the caverns. Though they now continued their original journey, both father and son carried with them more than just the practical knowledge gained within the Echo Caverns. They carried the voices, Faye's most especially, and the understanding that some connections transcend physical presence, spanning not just space but time itself, preserved in stone and memory alike. The mountain winds, now gentle after the storm's fury, seemed to whisper around them as they began breaking trail through the deep snow. To Atreus, those whispers sometimes sounded almost like distant voices, echoes of the cavern they had left behind, or perhaps just echoes of knowledge now carried within them, continuing to resonate long after the actual sounds had faded into silence. Kratos adjusted his axe across his back and set a measured pace through the snow, his mind unusually at peace despite the challenges that still awaited them. Some burdens, he had learned, become lighter when properly understood, not eliminated, but transformed from crushing weight to strengthening resistance, like muscles growing stronger through consistent effort. Behind them, barely visible now in the mountain face, the narrow fissure that marked the entrance to the Echo Caverns remained, unremarkable from outside, extraordinary within. Just as the giants themselves had often hidden their greatest achievements beneath humble appearances, the true value of their discoveries lay beneath the surface, in meanings and connections that casual observation would never reveal. As father and son continued their journey across the snow-covered landscape, the Echo Caverns kept their silent vigil, preserving voices and wisdom across centuries, including now the voices of a god of war and his son, their stories joining the ancient chorus within the mountain's heart. waiting for future travelers who might discover them anew. In Jotunheim's vast stillness, their footprints stretch behind them like the trail of a story still unfolding. Temporary marks on the endless white that would soon be covered by fresh snow, yet still part of a greater pattern continuing beyond what any single perspective could encompass. Like the echoes in the cavern, some traces remain long after visible evidence has vanished, resonating through time in ways that cannot be seen but might still be felt by those who know how to listen. And so our journey through the realms draws to a close for tonight. May Hypnos, god of sleep, watch over you as you drift through dreams of legendary proportions. If these tales of gods and monsters helped guide you to restful sleep, consider supporting our journey by liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Your support gives me the strength to continue sharing these stories night after night. Remember, these videos play uninterrupted through the night, with no ads to disturb your slumber, just the soothing sounds of mythic realms to accompany your dreams. For those seeking passage to exclusive content, our Patreon offers early access to all videos and special playlists crafted to enhance your sleep. The link awaits in the description below. Until our next journey together, may your sleep be deep, your dreams be mighty, and your rest be undisturbed by the conflicts of gods and men. Sleep well, brave one.